Today I'm going to show you how I put these 3-rib tractor style tires on my Cub Cadet 782. This is a 1981 tractor and it's built like a tank. It has a rear hydraulic sleeve hitch and you just aren't going to get any modern tractor that's built this beefy. But to make it a little bit more like a big boy tractor, I really wanted to put on some appropriate tractor tires. After I go through the hurdles of doing this, I'll discuss any changes to the steering characteristics and if I think it was an improvement or not. This tractor had 8-inch diameter rims that were about 5.4 inches wide bead to bead. So this will be basically the same for almost any modern garden tractor from like the 1970s until now. The tire size that was on it was 16 by 6.5-8. The tires I'm gonna be putting on it are Deestone 4.00-8. So a little bit narrower and more tractor-like. The problem with these tires though is that they're meant for a like 3 3/4 to 4-inch wide rim, and that's about 1.5 inches narrower than what I have on here already. I've seen some people mount them on the wide rims and it looks okay, but it really kind of flares out the tire and I just didn't love it. It's just not gonna give that cool look that I was going for. Another option you could do is you can get 16 by 6.5 3-rib tires meant for the wide rims, but they just look cartoonish. The center rib is so wide, it honestly, it looks much worse than just the normal tires that come on the tractor. And to make matters worse, those are like $100 each, where these Deestone tires were 2 for $65, and that included tubes. So to make these tires look right, I really needed a narrower rim that had the same spindle that this Cub Cadet takes. It's a 1-inch spindle. And a lot of the older tractors, like 1960s, did have that narrower rim, but it was on a 3/4-inch spindle. So that just wasn't gonna work for me. I really just couldn't find anything that would fit and look right, and I didn't want to spend a ton of money on this old tractor. So what it came down to is I was gonna go ahead and narrow these rims myself. To do this, I first had to remove the tires from the rims, and if you've ever done this, you know it can be a lot trickier than it seems. To make it easier, just make sure you lube the heck out of that rim with some soapy water. You really should be using a set of tire spoons like the ones that are made for little motorcycle tires. I just used some pry bars, which worked fine. I didn't really mind if I was gonna scratch the rims because I knew I was gonna be painting them. Once I had the rim off, I used 36mm wide automotive masking tape, which is a little bit more flexible than like your household masking tape, and there was a gentle taper on this rim. I wrapped it around the rim and then I put a line across it with a permanent marker so I could mate the rims back together after I cut them and made them in the same spot, just in case my tape job wasn't perfectly straight. And I was gonna cut to the outside of the tape with a .045 DeWalt cutoff wheel. So that would give me about a 1.5-inch cutout section. And if you've ever used these cutoff wheels, don't buy the cheap ones. Always wear a face shield. They can blow up in your face. You don't want to mess with that. So just be careful with these little cutoff wheels. When I was cutting it, I mounted it to the tractor spindle backwards. So the wide part that I wanted to cut off was pointing outwards. And I just kind of rubbed an old tire against it so it wouldn't try to spin around on me when I was using the cutoff wheel. And honestly, this worked pretty good. It was really pretty easy. I cleaned up the edges with a flap disc on my angle grinder when I was done. And I also cleaned off a lot of the paint just so I had great conductivity when I was trying to do my welding. Next, I lined the rims up and made some rough measurements all the way around. Tried to make sure the 2 circles were perfectly aligned and concentric, and lined up my old permanent marker line. And I tack welded it. After tacking a couple times and measuring, and once I was pretty confident, I went to town with the welder. And this first weld that's gonna be on the kind of the inside part of the rim, but what's outside, not touching the tube, this is gonna be my structural weld. I'm not gonna grind it or anything. I'm gonna just make sure I'm getting good penetration. And this is gonna hold an incredible amount of energy. So this is the part where I'm gonna say, don't try this at home. I calculated about 2.5 tons of force when you inflate this tire to 35 PSI. So that's the force trying to blow this tire apart, and you can imagine what that could do. The diameter of the part that I welded is about 7 3/4 of an inch, and it's about 90 thousandths of an inch thick. So that works out to about 2,400 PSI of stress. So it's really not a lot if it's done right. This is steel. This is, welding wire that's rated at 79,000 PSI. So I'm not really worried about it, but again, I'll just mention, this is not for somebody who's just learning how to weld. You wanna make sure that weld is done right so that, nothing catastrophic happens here. So on the inside of the rim where the tube is gonna be touching, I just turned down my wire feed speed and laid down a really low weld, mostly just to make sure I don't have any sharp spots that tube is gonna be touching. I just don't want my tube to be popping. And I also cleaned this inside part up with the flap disc, again, just to smooth everything out for the sake of the tube. I ended up painting these rims with Rust-Oleum canvas white, which turned out way, honestly, better than I expected. It almost perfectly matches the Cub Cadet white. Came out really candy shell, beautiful, glossy. I laid a couple ultra thin layers and then I laid it on pretty thick, and it just worked out great. When I went to put these tires back on, I didn't want to have to use my levers on it because I didn't want to damage the paint that I just put on. So I made a super soapy mix of water and Dawn dish soap in a spray bottle. I actually did about 1 parts soap to 4 parts water. So we're talking ultra slippery here. And I was able to work that tire on with no tools. I just had to make sure I got the tire deep up in the deep part of the rim so I could, kind of wiggle it and get it on there. And before I pumped it up, I just made quadruple checked that I wasn't pinching my tube anywhere. If you're pinching your tube, it's gonna put a hole in it. So just make sure the tube isn't like overlapping the tire in any way. So how did it work? Honestly, it looks really cool. I think it looks great. It was well worth the effort just aesthetically. From a steering perspective, it feels like it takes about maybe 60 or 70% of the force to turn this thing as it used to. It's got great traction. These ribs just bite, where previously it would push really bad, especially if you're going down a hill on like a wet grass. It would just really badly understeer. That's just not the case anymore. Now, if you have like a wet yard, which I don't, you can see I've got a lot of hills here. It drains great. But if you've got a wet yard, there is a much smaller, narrower contact patch. So you can bet these are probably gonna dig into the ground a little bit more and possibly tear up your yard. So maybe not the tire for you. If you wanna do this and you're not gonna narrow your rim, you can do it on your wide rim. It doesn't look perfect, but it does look still pretty cool. So what's next on this tractor? I'm gonna go through the steering bit by bit and try to take any play out of it. I'm gonna put some really mean tires on the back, get some just incredible traction. And that's gonna be great if I try to put some like farm implements on the back of this, like plows or discs. I'm gonna ultimately end up cleaning it up, painting it, putting new stickers, and just after a good mechanical tune-up, try to make this thing as good as it once was, brand new. What do you guys think I should do to this, by the way? If you guys have any ideas, I'd love to hear them. And if those are the kinds of videos you want to see, make sure to mention in the comments and I'll try to put some of these videos on my channel. Thanks for watching.